Welcome to our second video on the subject of farming. This one variously titled Farming and People, Social Basis of Agriculture, whatever you want to call it. Generally talking about, how you muster the people needed to get the work done, and who does the work, and how much work it takes. Short answer is a lot of work. and who does it? Everybody who can. The BBC video you're going to see a piece of, the separate link in the agenda for the week. The host presenter of that video, who's an African woman, which is one reason to watch that too. He says, "Oh, even the little children get involved." Well, she makes it sound like it's a great thing. It's a lot of work, okay? And as much as we don't like child labor, right? But when you're a subsistence farming family, everybody has to contribute, okay? That's just the way it is. So anyway, think about that when you're watching that video and you see the kids out in the field there. All right, so following what we talked about from last time. This quote from your textbook: "Development of food production changed human life more than any other event in human history." Well, you don't go changing, human life without a lot of work. And as I said, farming is a lot of work. So the main points for this week: I want you to appreciate the complexity of African farming or agricultural systems, understand the development of agriculture in different ecological zones and different crops and so on. We covered that in the last video, and this one is about understanding the social basis of agriculture. The social basis of agriculture starts also with understanding the different stages of food production. So when you're talking about farming, that includes preparing the soils, usually once again before the rains start. And then when rains start, then you planting. Plant whatever your crops are you're growing, of course. Then there's weeding. And if you're successful, hopefully, harvesting. And then winnowing or cleaning the crop. And then finally packaging and moving it and storing it somewhere. But of course, in order to turn, and if this presumes some sort of grain crop, but to turn that into food, then you have to be processing. You need to clean it. There's pounding of rice grains, for example, or other things to remove the hulls and the inedible parts, and you have to grind it into grain, or grind it into flour and so on, and then the cooking portion. The other part of this that I'll talk a little bit about throughout is gender. Who does this work is often determined by gender, where, for example, preparing the soil and harvesting and planting are jobs primarily for men in many societies. Weeding, something everybody does. You'll see that in the Dubé video. Processing and cooking, though, primarily are for women, with women being primarily responsible for getting a finished food on the table or on the platter or whatever it might be. So it's very common to see gender differentiation in labor. The other way to do it would be, and this is very common among societies in West Africa, gender differentiation by crop. So as it develops in the 19th and 20th centuries, especially when you start to have cash crops, men are responsible for the cash crops, say along Senegambia area would be peanuts, and women are responsible for the food crops. Also along the Gambia River, and I'll show you some pictures here in a minute, women are responsible for rice, whereas men are responsible for other food crops like sorghum and millet. Okay? It's just the way they organize labor and organize the society. So there's just different ways of doing it. Of course, we're talking about a continent here, huge place, a lot of diversity, and of course change over time, right? That's why we have history. So once again, with our ecological zones, then the lightest green is the savanna zone, so that's the first agricultural zone, then the savanna woodland, and then the rainforest zone, and so on, as you've seen this a number of times now. And there's once again a picture of the savanna zone, kind of get a picture of what that's like. Primary agricultural zone for sorghum and millet. All right, let's start talking about agricultural labor. As I said, the first thing you do is clear the field. You've got to prepare the soil before you plant. You can't just throw seeds on a hard field. That's what you see here. These are women in Gambia, where I have a number of pictures from there because I've been there a couple of times, most recently. And this is hoe agriculture. You see this women. It's a short-handled hoe. Bend over at the waist, so you get some leverage, and you're digging up the soil. And you can see this is the dry season because you see how dusty it is, right? So they're preparing a field here before planting. Okay? And this is hard work. There's no doubt about it. Okay, if you try it yourself, bend over at the waist and try to dig up the ground, in a field somewhere, and you'll see it's tough. The tool itself is, as I said, the short-handled hoe. Most hoes that we use have these long handles on them, but that's not really made for digging. Okay, that's more made for chopping up some weeds or something like that. If you really need to dig, you need greater leverage, and so this shorter handle gives you that. Also, the shorter handle has a smaller head on the hoe here, so it uses less iron. And we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks in the use of iron and the importance of that. So it makes it a less expensive tool. These are pretty common across the continent. I got one in my office. If you want to come by and see it, I bought it in Tanzania, so it's all the way in East Africa. This is from Gambia area in West Africa. But that's not the same everywhere. Just down the coast from Gambia is Guinea-Bissau, and these are the hoes that they use there. They look like paddles, for a rowboat or something. But they're these big, as you can see, really long hoes, and these are done by men, and they basically throw it into the dirt, kind of like a spear, and then twist it, and that flat blade then turns over the soil. Probably one of the reasons they do this is the soil in Guinea-Bissau is a thicker, richer soil, whereas in Gambia it tends to be drier and more sandy, so it's easier to dig. This takes quite a bit more labor to do. Anyway, but so once again, big continent, you see diversity across the continent here. Again, women, once again, this is rice along the Gambia River, rice being a women's crop. And so you see these women, they stretch a cord across there so you can plant in rows. You see each woman is clutching a number of plants in her left hand. Rice like this, what's called paddy rice that you plant in a flooded field, you first have to plant in a nursery or a protected area. Okay, then you plant the seeds, then you get the seedlings like this, 7-8 inches long. Then you dig those up, and then you put them in your main field. Okay, and once again, bend over at the waist, kind of back-breaking sort of work here, and great for stretching out your hamstrings, I got to tell you. But also hard work, and you're wading in water the whole time. It's hot, it's humid. It's also dangerous. There's snakes and stuff here, so it's not an easy thing to do. Once again, okay. Once you have rice, then of course you have to clean it, and this is what this woman is doing here. She has first pounded the rice to separate the inedible outer part from the grains of rice, the part that you eat, and then she kind of dumps it out like this. And then a wind will come along and carry away the lighter inedible parts, and then the grains of rice drop down, and you can't see it, of course, but down on the ground is a mat or a piece of fabric to catch the grains of rice. And then you still have to pick through it to get rice. This is a picture of chicken yassa, which is a very popular dish in Senegal and Gambia and West Africa. So usually served with rice. It's a stewed chicken dish with, and you can see underneath the chicken there, hopefully, a mound of these cooked onions. And it's quite often then served with, it's got a lot of lemon juice in it. It's a great dish. So there's a couple of Senegalese restaurants in Chicago. If you get a chance to go there and eat some chicken yassa, I highly recommend it. But so for here, then you see rice from beginning, to processing to the plate, right? Weeding is, well, once again, also kind of a back-breaking thing to do, but you have to do it. You have to get the weeds out of there so they don't choke out your food crop, okay? They either grow up bigger and literally choke it out, or they take the nutrients out of the soil and there's not enough left for your food crop. This is a group of men in Gambia, and they're weeding groundnuts or peanuts, because groundnuts or peanuts are a man's crop. That's why there are only men in this field doing this. And you can see over here on the lower right-hand portion, you see how all the weeds and grasses are in there, and you see on the left where they've already done the weeding, and it's all clean. It's just a group of men from a household, father and brother and sons. I think there's a cousin there, going through and doing this usually a couple of times during the growing season. So that'll keep you busy sun up to sundown, let me tell you. Harvesting then, once again, is important, and we'll talk about this once again in a couple of weeks' time, but iron or steel tools. You see this is teff, which I showed you in the last video. This is a guy harvesting it. Bend down, grab a hold of it, and cut it with that iron scythe or sickle. It's so as a grain, then it doesn't grow up very high. And then cleaning the crop or winnowing, much like that woman was doing with the rice. That's what these men are doing here. You lay it out in a pile and you beat it with these sticks to kind of separate out the grains, though, or as they would say in the biblical passage, separate the wheat from the chaff, right? The good parts from the not good parts. And then what you do is you throw it up in the air. And then when a wind comes along, as you can kind of see if you look closely, the wind carries away the lighter, inedible stuff, and the heavier grain falls down into a pile. Okay? And that'll clean most of it out, but you still have to pick through it once again to get it. And then once you have the grains, if you're making some kind of bread or porridge or something, often you have to grind it. And you'll see this also in that video of the Dubé family. It'll show them grinding grain. This typically grinding is done by women, and it's a hard thing to do. You've got a grind stone, and you've got another stone there, and you just push down, and you crush the grains and make a powder out of them, just like flour. I presume you're familiar with flour, wheat flour. These are other things. That's probably millet there. And you don't usually do this too far ahead, so it's something you do every day before you do the meal. Okay. And as I said, typically done by women, and a considerable part of their women's domestic workload. Now, in Central African forest, the rainforest area, as I talked about in the last video, different types of crops, right? Right? Before you can plant in a rainforest, though, if you take a look at the density of that forest there, you got to clear the land. That is a lot of work. Okay? This is a chart here, graph I guess it is, showing if you have a piece of land, in this case a hectare of land, which is a metric acre, and let's say it's never been cleared. All right, it's what's called virgin forest. All right, it can have up to 1,200 tons moist weight of vegetation on that land. Okay, so you have to clear 1,200 tons of vegetation off that land before you can even plant. Okay? How much time does that take? Well, the bottom of the chart tells you here, 500 man days. So obviously, if you just got one person, that's going to take you about 1 2/3 years. Or 5 men, it's going to take you 100 days to clear that land. And that's hard physical work. Okay? Which is why once you clear that land, you typically will grow on it for 3 years or so. Okay? And I'll talk about that more in just a minute here. Okay? Once again, in the forest zone, what are you growing? You're going to grow root crops typically like yams. But then once you grow them, you still have to process them. And this is what we see here, women pounding yams. They have a mortar and pestle. Usually you do this collectively here. Got another picture. Here we go, pounding yams into fufu. Somebody in the in our first Intro to Africa discussion was talking about eating fufu. It's you know, this is what they're making here, and this is what fufu looks like. Okay, it's these kind of soft, spongy balls, as you can see in the background and on this dish right here. This looks like it's made with some greens, possibly some okra in there as well, and then a sauce on top. Like I said in the last video, like the matoke, you eat it usually with your hands. And rip off some of the fufu, collect some of the food in there, and then eat it a piece at a time. So, oh, here's the matoke again. I showed you in the last video, and then what it looks like when you cook it, and so on. Okay. So not everywhere is hoe agriculture. Once again, plows, especially in Egypt historically, and also in Ethiopia, because they had access to the livestock they could use for plowing. Something I showed you in the last video here, so just to review, yields of food and nutritions per acre, which means what? It means you need to plant a variety of crops, both to minimize your risk, right, but also to maximize your nutrition. Right? You want a variety of foods. If you're just eating the same thing every day, you're not getting a range of nutrition. Okay? Right? Let's talk about that for a minute. Now, most people around the world measure land in a land area called a hectare. What's a hectare? Well, that's this second box here that you see. It's a square, which would be 100 meters by 100 meters. So a hectare, as I said, is a metric system land area. It's a metric meter. Okay? And like the metric system, everything's based on hundreds. So it's 100 meters by 100 meters. Makes pretty good sense. We measure land in acres, which I got to say doesn't make much sense. Okay? Why is that? Because what is an acre? An acre is a square 208.7 feet by 208.7 feet. Really? Okay. Yeah, good luck with that. An easier way to understand it is if you go out in the kind of nicer suburbs like Northbrook or someplace like that, okay, a plot of land where you have a suburban house is a 1/4 acre, okay, just so you can kind of visualize it. In the city, a plot of land is going to be more like 1/8 of an acre. So two household plots would be a 1/4 acre, okay, or 8 household plots would be in the city would be an acre. Okay, but once again, as an area of land that you're growing with hoe agriculture, that's a lot to be bend over and dig up all that area just with a hoe. Okay, but a hectare is about the size of land that a family of, say, a household of 5 or 6 people would clear every year. Okay, so it's a fair standard size for an African subsistence farming household. They would clear a hectare of land. Okay, now, I know this chart's going to blow your mind, and I hope you're not looking at this on your phone because you're not going to be able to see this in much detail. But as I said, this is the example from the rainforest area. Okay, so you cleared your 1,200 moist tons of vegetation off the land. So what are you going to do? Okay, this shows what you're going to grow on a piece of land through the calendar year. All right, so we have October through September, October through September, October through September. Once again, what happens in tropical Africa, okay, is once you clear a piece of land, you can typically grow crops on that land for 3 years, and only 3 years. Why is that? Because without the use of artificial fertilizers, the soil becomes exhausted. Right? The soils in Africa typically don't hold moisture or fertility very well, and they get worn out. So you have to clear new land pretty much every year. Okay? Then you'll grow the first year you clear a piece of land, you'll grow on it your most important crops because the land is at its most fertile. Then the second year, kind of a mixture of crops. And then third year, the least important crops because that land is almost worn out. Okay, that's what this chart shows you here. Okay, what do you do when the rain starts? You clear the undergrowth, you cut the vines, you fell the smaller trees, you fell the large trees, you collect them, heap them, and you burn it all, you burn it down basically, and that produces ash. That's what you use for fertilizer. All right, then you fence your field and you grow, in this case, because this is a forest area, you grow yams. And then you do weeding. Okay. The second year that you plant on this piece of land, you can't grow many yams, but you'll grow some. So you'll prepare yams. That's the first year you plant yams, maize, and cocoa yam and plantain. So a variety of crops. The second year, when the soil fertility is declined, you can't plant yams, so you're going to plant maize on that plot of land. And then third year, you just plant cassava, all right, because it can grow in pretty much any sort of conditions. But this presumes that you have at least 3 pieces of land in operation at any point in time. One piece of land in its first year, another piece of land in its second year, and the third piece of land in its third year. And then you're going to clear a new piece of land the next year, so that'll be in its first year. What was your first year land is your second year. What was your second year is your third year. What was your third year then you let grow fallow, or you let it grow up wild again. That's the way the soil is going to get replenished. And you have to leave that plot of land fallow for up to 20 years. All right, so you're constantly clearing new land, constantly rotating your crops into different fields, and constantly creating new plots. Now, the problem is, of course, if you live in a village, you will eventually run out of land close enough around the village for you to reach. Okay? And especially if the village's population is growing. So what happens then typically is people will move out. You know, a family or an extended family or maybe the next generation will go out further away from the village, found their own village, and start farming the land around there. Okay? Because historically, most places in Africa, land was not individually owned, but it was collectively owned. And you would have the elders, usually the elder men in society, would determine who gets access to which plots of land and who can use it this year, and so on and so on. But it's a lot of work. You've got to clear the land every year. You've got to figure out, wait a minute, which year is this plot of land in, first, second, or third? What can I grow on it, etc., etc. All once again without written records. Okay, so pretty amazing to me that you're able to do all that. Okay, and this chart shows the person who made it says man days, but actually labor days of labor that it takes. So the first year you clear the plot of land is the greatest amount of labor. Once again, clearing the land is 120, about 150 man days of labor. And then there's the weeding, planting, etc., and so on. This is the second year you grow on that same piece of land. You've already cleared it, so you have to do some clearance, small brush and so on at the beginning of the year, and then weeding and so on throughout the year. And then the third year you grow on it, Most of your labor is at the beginning. You have to clear some small brush and so on and plant your cassava, but then very little labor requirements near the end of your growing season. Okay, so you're growing on different pieces of land with different crops. Once again, reduce your risk, right? Maximize your nutrition, but also to spread out your labor requirements. Okay? You can't be everywhere all at the same time. Okay? So when you can spread that out throughout the growing cycle, you know, it obviously spreads your workload then throughout the year a little bit more. You know, you couldn't clear, you know, 3 plots of land every year. You just can't do that. I mean, it's just too much work. So you have to rotate it in and grow on a plot of land for at least 3 years or so to get the most out of it. The exception is going to be in Egypt. Well, there's 2 exceptions I can think of. One is Egypt, one is in the forest zones, like in Uganda, where they grow bananas, as I showed you, those plantains that become matoke. That's rich volcanic soil. It doesn't get as worn out. Besides the banana plants themselves, once you harvest from them, you chop the plants down and you work them into the soil as fertilizer. And they will rot and decompose and add nutrients back to the soil. And you can grow on a plot of land for 15, 20 years. As I said, the other exception is going to be Egypt for some very specific reasons that we'll see next week. All right. So I put this link also in the weekly agenda, but I want you to watch this. It's about 10 minutes of this video here. First 2 minutes talk about pastoralism or livestock keeping, in this case cattle. And then the next 8 minutes are, once again, the Dube family of Zimbabwe, showing you about farming. All right. Thanks very much.